And then I have the sinking feeling the whole time where I'm like, we're just scratching the surface of the magnitude of this problem, where now I compare it to pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom. Because while I was getting accolades and awards for creating several thousand jobs, our economy shed 4 million manufacturing jobs that were centered in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, these places I was working. And then Donald Trump wins in 2016. And he wins because of the aftermath of the automation of these jobs in the swing states. There's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation in a voting area and the movement towards Trump in that area. It's one of the strongest statistical correlations you can find.
So strategically, it was very good what he did to win, right? To just keep saying to those people, I'm bringing the jobs back or something to that effect?
Yeah. And
whether it was true or not, but I'm just talking about in terms of like just pure politic of I want to win.
Well, he got a ton of credit for just acknowledging the problem and the pain. And even the folks that heard his solutions kind of knew that he wasn't going to like magically bring the jobs back. But they were just pleased that someone gave a shit. And then the Democratic response at the time was, so he was like, you know, we're going to make America great again. And then the Democratic response was, America's already great. And then the people that were listening to Trump were like, no, things are not great. And in these communities, I was blown away by the disparities between Missouri and Manhattan, or Detroit and San Francisco. Like, where have you done a lot of traveling in?
Oh, this past year I went to about 100 cities in the United States. So
then you may know if you've been around.
Yeah.
Because when you fly between Detroit and San Francisco, you feel like you've traversed decades and dimensions and ways of life.
Well, it feels like we have many different countries within our country.
Yes.
You can use that. There you go.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, if I use that, we'll know where it came from.
When you throw it at a debate.
But it is true.
Yeah.
It feels like we're many different countries. And so when Trump won, I took that as a giant red flag where I said, wow, like this is actually getting away from us much faster than anyone seems to believe, that we're in the midst of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the country. Because I spent 6.5 years working with hundreds of startups around the country, and even if they're successful, they're not going to create jobs at the scale as what's being lost in retail, trucking, call centers, fast food, and accounting, bookkeeping, law. I mean, one of the jokes I tell is that I was a lawyer long enough to know that you can automate away a lot of that job. So with all the AI advancement that's coming around the corner, the stuff that got Donald Trump into office is just going to accelerate in a huge way. 30% of American malls are going to close in the next 4 years, and being a cashier is still the most common job in the country. And the average cashier is a 39-year-old woman making $10 an hour. So what is she going to do when the mall closes? I mean, it's not like another store is going to be hiring. And so this is what I saw in 2016, where I was trying to unpack the actual data as to how Trump won and why. And then I saw our country was not having any conversation about the economic transformation that we're in the midst of. Instead, we're scapegoating immigrants. If you watch cable news, it's Russia, racism, Facebook, the FBI, Hillary Clinton. And it's like, yeah, all of that was there. But the real driver is the fact that millions of Americans lost their manufacturing jobs. Millions of Americans will now lose their retail jobs, the call center jobs, the fast food jobs. And when it gets to trucking, it's going to be an epic disaster. Being a truck driver is the most common job in 29 states. There are 3.5 million truckers in this country, average age 49, 94% men. Tens of thousands of them are ex-military. Average pay is $46,000 a year. It's one of the higher paid jobs for high school grads. Like, what is their next move going to be when the robot trucks come in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so do you think part of the problem here, or part of the disconnect, let's say, was that while the manufacturing sector was sort of bottoming out, that the tech sector in its own way, just the way we think of the tech sector, meaning Facebook, Google, Twitter, all these things, they were all kind of blowing up, and they were expanding and expanding and expanding. And then the media focuses on them. So it seems like there's a gajillion jobs and tech is going to solve everything and all of that. Yet that's actually not reality. Like, there was just like this huge chasm between sort of the optics of it and the reality of it.
Yeah, and certainly the media narratives are not helping any. But some numbers, so people get a sense, only 8% of jobs in the US are STEM and 92% are not. Is it realistic to try and train 92% to do the jobs that are currently being occupied by 8%? Probably not.
Probably not.
If you look at the success rates for federally funded retraining programs for displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest, 0 to 15% success rates. Is that going to be enough when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of workers? Almost certainly not. And so you never hear a politician say, when they're saying like, oh, we're going to educate and retrain Americans for the jobs of the future, oh, by the way, we're shit terrible at that. It's like, but any objective study, any independent study shows that we are indeed shit terrible at it. And so why are we talking about doing something that we were not able to do for the manufacturing workers? And I studied economics, so economic theory says we'd retrain all these people, but that's not how it's played out in real life.
So you truly view right now, because of the way tech is changing us and sort of the speed with which it's changing us, you truly view this as a unique sort of inflection point in human history, right?
Yeah, we're in the midst of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the world. What experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. I know you had Martin Ford on recently.
Yeah.
So he and I agree on most of the major themes of this. And the thing that has convinced me is that because of my work with Venture for America, I was invited to all of like the high-level design sessions and social innovation conferences, and I got a sense as to what people are doing in this space, and nothing anyone is doing is going to address the fundamental set of problems.
Okay, so now, all of that being said, have you heard about this universal basic income thing?
I have heard something about that.
You have heard about this? All right.
Yes.
Well, I guess then, can you define universal basic income for those who have no idea? I mean, this is a freaking softball, man. Here you go.
Yes. Universal basic income is a policy where every member of a society, let's say every U.S. citizen, gets a certain amount of money to meet your basic needs, no questions asked. So my proposal, the Freedom Dividend, would put $1,000 a month in the hands of every American adult starting at age 18 to do whatever you want. And that's universal basic income. It sounds dramatic now in 2019, but Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. Martin Luther King championed it in the 1960s. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study saying this would be great for America, also in the 60s and 70s. It passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Nixon, and one state has had a dividend for almost 40 years where everyone in Alaska now gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year. So I know at first blush, everyone getting $1,000 a month sounds very dramatic and almost too good to be true, but it actually is very, very deeply rooted in American thought.
And when you say everyone, you mean the person that's, from someone that's unemployed to someone that is worth 20 million bucks. They're both getting that $1,000?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, now how are we going to pay for this thing, right? That has to be the next question.
Yes. So first, it ends up costing a lot less than most people think, and there are a few reasons for this. Number one is that about half of Americans are already getting direct support from the government in some form. So my dividend would be universal, but it's opt-in, and if you opt in, you forego benefits from certain existing programs. So the headline cost goes down a lot very quickly. Because
so this is like someone that's getting some other social welfare or something, and then if they choose to take the UBI, so like what type of thing would they lose? Like food stamps or like?
Yes, so it's food stamps, housing subsidies, fuel subsidies, cash and cash-like programs. We have about 120 welfare programs, most of which are cash or cash-like. So this excludes Medicaid, but it would include food stamps and most other welfare programs.
Right. And can you split the difference on that? So could you say I'm going to only take $500 a month UBI, and I'm going to take, $500 a month? So you can't. So you have to pick one, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I've talked to people who are on various welfare programs, and they love the idea of getting $1,000 unconditional because they dislike the case manager, the reporting requirements, and everything else. And so you can reduce the enrollments in our existing program significantly. And it brings down the headline cost very quickly, because if someone's already getting $700 in benefits, then the cost is $300 instead of $1,000.
Do we have good accounting numbers on actually how much people are getting? Like, I'm going to guess that a certain amount of people, it may be one thing for food stamps, but when you talk about housing subsidies and things like that, that has to be way more. I mean, the one that I always use is that my sister and her husband live in New York City, struggling to get by. They both have full-time jobs, 2 kids. You can imagine how expensive schools are, and just living in Manhattan and the rest of it. And half of their building is market price, and half is rent subsidized. And then what happens is, and I know you know this, is that generation after generation live in the same apartment, then for like, you know, $400, and then my sister and her husband end up paying $4,000 for a tiny 2 bedrooms. So that people basically just get locked in these programs, where if you were to say to the guy that's living in an apartment for $600, here's $1,000, you got to get going, nobody's going to do it. You'd have to be an idiot to do it, basically.
Well, I think, knowing what I know about New York and the subsidized rents, it's not a federal program, I don't believe. And so like, their situation might be that they actually get the $1,000 and then it's helpful to them. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the math, it ends up reducing the headline cost of this by hundreds of billions of dollars very, very quickly, because people will either not opt in, or if they do opt in, it costs a lot less than $1,000 a head. So that's reason number one, where that reduces the cost from like a top line, let's call it $3 trillion a year. It goes down pretty quickly. The second big thing is that the money doesn't disappear. In our hands, it ends up getting circulated through the economy over and over again, what I call the trickle-up economy. And so if you see that it would end up increasing consumer buying power and the size of the economy by about 10 to 12%, we would generate hundreds of billions in new tax revenue just on the basis of more economic activity in our society. We'd also save hundreds of billions on things like incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room healthcare, and things that we're already spending about $1 trillion on.
Meaning because people are going to use that money for those things?
Either that, or we get to spend less on it. So one of the examples that, and this is going to sound very politician-y, so I apologize, but I was in New Hampshire, and a corrections officer in New Hampshire said we should pay people to stay out of jail. Because
you got to give me their name and tell me you put their arm around them and the whole, you know,
I
really ham it up for a politician.
Yeah, I really should.
Come on,
I was
man.
like, I was there, and so we think we're saving money, but we end up spending the money on the back end anyway. If someone ends up falling through the cracks and they land in our institutions are incredibly expensive. Mm-hmm. And at least one estimate was that if you reduce poverty in this country, you would increase our GDP by $700 billion just on the basis of higher graduation rates, better physical health, and better mental health. So we're going to get back a lot of the money. But the big change we need to make to pay for this dividend is that right now, Amazon, $1 trillion tech company, paid 0 in federal taxes last year. Mm-hmm. Netflix, 0 in federal taxes, less than you did on this awesome operation.
Yeah.
And you know Amazon's investing billions in AI. It's going to be one of the mega winners from the fourth industrial revolution. So we need to have a mechanism where the American people actually get some of that. My big proposal is that we have to join every other advanced economy in the world and have a value-added tax that then gets the American public a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. And because our economy is now so vast at $20 trillion, even a mild value-added tax generates over $800 billion in new revenue. So that, plus the savings from existing programs, plus the economic growth, plus the value gains, enough to pay for a dividend of $1,000 a month.
So I know that a certain percentage of my audience, they know that generally I'm a small government guy, or I want it to be as small as it can be to function as a general rule. So it could be streamlined enough. I want it to exist well enough so that things are working without all of the fat and all of the pork and all of the rest of it. But so some of my alarms go off here because of the idea that this would be federal in nature, so that $1,000 if you live in, say, Los Angeles, you get next to nothing. $1,000 if you live maybe in somewhere in the middle of the country, you're going to get a lot more. Is there any way you can compensate for any of that, or is that not even worth thinking about in your estimation? Or
well, there are a few reasons why it's good. It's a good idea to keep it uniform. Number one is that there are other reasons why people live in LA. Often, not just the weather, but access to
pretty much it. Yeah.
But access to certain economic opportunities. So you're making a trade-off already. And it's also very hard to administer, because the fact is, if you're getting paid more to live in an expensive place, a lot of people would live in an expensive place and then like sneak off and spend the money someplace cheaper. So it's much cleaner for everyone to make it uniform. It also ends up fueling mobility in both directions, because at least some people might feel like, hey, if I leave LA and go go to Arizona, like I can actually live much better. It's like it will help balance things out.
Mm-hmm. What do you say just to the general idea, sort of, I guess, the philosophical idea that if you just keep giving people things, that eventually they just start doing less for themselves? That $1,000, like, yeah, maybe there's some place in the country that you could live, then you could play video games all day and smoke pot all day and not really do much, and that we're going to cushion people's ability to not just get up and get going.
Well,
not that people want that, but that just human nature is, oh, I start getting something and I can just kind of ease up a little bit.
So there are three things I would say. First, I agree with your vision of government. And the great thing about this is that this actually does not grow the federal bureaucracy. What we all hate is when you have money just flow up to the pipes and then disappear and then you never see it again and you don't know what the hell happened. Mm-hmm. This actually puts the economic resources back in our hands. It's one of the reasons why the only state that's done this is Alaska, which is a deep red conservative state passed by a Republican governor, and it's wildly popular there. Like the dividends, everyone's favorite thing about what the government does, because it's not a giant government program. It's actually almost cost-free to administer and just puts money right into our hands. So I agree with your vision of government, is that the last thing I want is like a new army of bureaucrats running around.
Yeah.
So,
but do you fear that even if everything you've said is completely on point, that anytime just the way that the system works, at least now, that anytime you try to put in a giant federal program, that the bureaucrats and just that middle management part of the government will figure out ways. Like you could be like, oh, it's real easy, guys. We got 320 million people in the country. Everyone's getting $1,000. The math works out. It's like, it's all good. But that then just the process of how government works will create all sorts of other problems.
Well, if you look at the way they do it in Alaska, it's actually very lightweight. Like as long as they can prove you're an Alaskan resident, you're there, it's like this is how many people you are. Like they have a very, very low level administrative burden, let's say. So as long as you can pull that off, which in my opinion, like this is where we have to go because because as the economy is transforming, and so number one, I agree with your vision of small government if we can achieve it. And so I'm going to come back to it with number three.
Yeah.
Number two is the biggest misconception about this is that it's somehow going to reduce work. And what I mean by this is you put this money into our hands, first it creates 2 million new jobs immediately in the economy. Because just more economic activity, the smoothie shop hires someone, the mechanic needs an assistant, like on and on through the economy. So
basically, people have more expendable income, more shopping occurs.
Yeah.
Pretty much the easiest way to say that. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing, though, that it does, it ends up fueling a lot of the work that right now our market does not recognize. So that's some of the stuff that you've done throughout your career, like arts, creativity, entrepreneurship. Like a lot of that stuff doesn't get recognized by the market till you become, frankly, like somewhat successful. But also work like my wife does. My wife's at home with our 2 boys, one of whom is autistic, and the market values her work at zero, even though it's incredibly hard and incredibly important. So it's not that putting this money into our hands somehow makes us work less. It creates conventional work. It ends up also fueling the sort of work that we want to do. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is this notion of what's happening in our economy. If you look around at the fact that suicides and drug overdoses have overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in American history, our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years, almost unheard of in a developed country. You know the last time our life expectancy declined 3 years in a row?
I guess it was probably like in the late 1920s, something like that?
Yeah, it was the Spanish flu of 1918. It's like where that killed millions of people. Oh. And this buzzsaw is just going to accelerate. When AI comes in and starts getting rid of call center workers and bookkeepers and accounts and the rest of it. And so when you're facing a set of changes that's this mammoth, putting cash into people's hands is actually the most lightweight thing you can do. Mm-hmm. Some of the other proposals that are out there are the ones that we must avoid, which are things like a jobs guarantee or like creating like a whole new array of subsistence jobs for
so that's
Americans
a massive difference you have than some of the other Democratic candidates, right? Because Bernie and I think Elizabeth Warren and a couple others are talking about a federal jobs guarantee, which to me, again, as a basically a small government guy, that sounds horrible to me. Like that sounds like indentured servitude to me.
Yes, One of the things is like, why not just get everyone gray overalls while you're at it?
Yeah, right. Like, give us the uniform and we'll flip widgets all day and that's it.
Yeah, and so I try and point out obvious things. It's like, hey, what if someone doesn't like the job they have? What if they're bad at it? What if they don't like their boss? What if their boss doesn't like them? What if the job actually, like, turns out you don't need it after a while? Like, if you're literally dependent upon a government job to survive and like actually have food on the table, then all of those things become existential. And you end up creating a whole new army of bureaucrats to administer this like massive jobs program. So I'm for infrastructure, creating jobs, like, because those are jobs we need to rebuild the infrastructure. But starting out saying we're going to guarantee everyone a job is exactly what we have to avoid.
So when they say that, when you hear them say that, do you honestly think that they believe that is the right thing to do, or even a feasible thing to do, or that they're just saying it because it sounds, if you're not really thinking about these issues that hard, to me, saying free everything sounds good. It all sounds good. Free college, free this, free job, all of these things. Just if you're not thinking, it's just like, oh, great, free, why not? Let's do it. If you're young and you haven't really put the acumen in to figure out what these things mean.
One of the dangers is that a lot of these politicians have never actually run a business, worked in a business, understand what the mechanics of these organizations look like on the ground. They're just lurching from press release to fundraiser to cable news hit, and they don't understand what a lived reality would be for a person who has to show up and like check in for their McJob. And the institutionalization of this thinking, it is sincere. Like, it's not like if you poke the person who's for a federal jobs guarantee, they're like, I was just kidding. No, I mean, like, they actually feel that.
Well, they feel it, right, but I guess feeling it and knowing are two different things.
Well,
right?
I mean, they believe it. Let's put it that way. Okay. They're sincere in their belief. And so if you buy that we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of the world, which we are, and then in my mind you wind up with like a couple of major models to try and respond to it. And my model is put economic buying power into the hands of every adult as fast as possible and help us rebuild our own communities, our own lives, our own families, and like find new forms of work that we find fulfilling and purposeful. The other model, in my opinion, is the government trying to figure out what sort of work we find meaningful and valuable and purposeful.
Yeah.
And this, to me, is what we must avoid at all costs.
Right, well, it's also a self-perpetuating thing, right? Because then the government always has to grow. We always have more people. We will always need more jobs. So they will always keep bringing more and more people into the system.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of the immediacy of this, as we're sitting here together in year 10 of an expansion, the U.S. labor force participation rate is close to a multi-decade low of 63%, the same levels as Ecuador and Costa Rica.
Wait, say that again, 63%
of working age Americans are presently in the workforce.
So when we hear this thing about job...
headline unemployment.
Yeah, that unemployment is at an all-time low, or this type of thing. That doesn't factor in that people just have checked out, right?
Yes.
That's basically what you're getting to?
Yeah, and if you remember candidate Trump in 2015, he was like, oh, this headline unemployment number is fake news, it's bunk, 95 million Americans out of the workforce. And now he's in office and he's like, oh, like, it's great. He was right the first time, because if you leave the workforce, you're not calculated into the headline unemployment number. It also doesn't include the fact that 94% of the new jobs created since 2005 are temporary gig or contract jobs. It doesn't include the fact that 44% of recent college graduates are underemployed in a job that doesn't require a degree. So the headline unemployment number is at best misleading and incomplete, at worst bullshit. Like it's somewhere in that range.
Right. So what about, I think a certain set of people would basically say, well, all right, some of this is making sense, and I can see why I would get rid of some of the bureaucracy, and you're doing a governmental program, but not totally expanding the government. But why not just do it for people under, say, $50,000, so that you don't need to give it to the guy that's making $75,000 that lives in Kansas City who's got a decent life? But why not just give it to the people 50,000, whatever the number you might come up with?
Sure. There are a few reasons. So one of the reasons why it's so wildly popular in Alaska is that it's universal. So it's not like, oh, rich Alaskans don't get it, poor Alaskans do. It's just like, no, you live here, it's a right of citizenship, you get your dividend. And so by making it so it's not a rich to poor transfer, you destigmatize it, you universalize it, and then you make it more politically popular, because it's just something that we all get as citizens and owners and shareholders of the richest, most advanced country in the history of the world. Number two, you get rid of any incentive to underreport your income. or to have monitoring requirements. Let's say I'm married to someone who's not working, and then maybe we could be like, hey, how about we file separately, and then you make nothing, and then you can get the dividend, and
so basically,
all this stuff.
It removes the cliff situation where you'd actually want to earn less. Right. So this is one of the things that I've struggled with the most about this, about the general idea, not the way you were laying it out, but that I don't like things that de-incentivize people to make more. And you mentioned this thing before about you could struggle for a long time and then suddenly you're making more, and it's like last year I paid more in taxes than I had ever made in my entire life before that. And like that, so I don't like the idea that the more work you do, the more value you bring, the more you sort of get punished. You know?
Yeah, and that's one of the problems with our current welfare programs. Like, in the extreme examples, a friend of mine, his sister is on disability. She was afraid to volunteer at a nonprofit because she was afraid someone would say you're healthy and then take away her benefits. I mean, what a terrible incentive system that is. But most welfare programs are constructed such that if you flourish, then you get less. Whereas if you have a dividend that's universal, you do nothing, you get the dividend. You do something, you get the dividend. Then, like, your incentive is actually to do something.
So why not just blow apart? So I think the best libertarian argument that I've heard for UBI is that basically, if you want to do UBI, it's got the right idea. Why not just blow apart the social safety net as is? Because we know it's just a boondoggle of middle management nonsense with all the whacked out incentives that you're talking about. Why not just take all of that money, do we even know how much money is actually put into these things?
Of course.
So how much right now?
600 billion, give or take.
Give or take. All right, so why not take the 600 billion that are on programs that we know are creating as many problems probably as they're fixing, if not more, and then do it that way? Like, do you think, because it almost feels like it's like a little bit of a stopgap, that you'd still have to get to that problem eventually?
Well, that's the beauty of this, the freedom dividend proposal, is that you have this 600 billion or so, and then you're saying, hey, guess what? Like, it's now a new right of citizenship, everyone gets it. And then what's going to happen is you're going to dramatically reduce the enrollment in these programs very, very quickly, because a lot of people will be like, I prefer the cash. And then this new incoming population would just opt for the dividend and then never end up on these welfare programs. So you'd end up shrinking the enrollments over time in the way you described. You just wouldn't do it all at once, because there are a lot of people in very distinct situations. And this is actually much more politically feasible and popular than going and trying to tear these programs up and from the roots up.
Yeah. Are you worried though that because states have different things related to social programs, that, I mean, we sort of addressed this already, but just that different states will deal with it so differently in terms of how they're giving benefits off UBI, that it just is going to create this weird, we may have a gajillion people moving to one state and leaving another state, or the rest of it, or you just think that that's...
Well, that's one reason why having uniform benefits, because right now there are block grants that go to various states, and the states do different things with it, as you're suggesting. Mm-hmm. And those are the programs that would be swapped out for UBI. So the more people that opt into UBI, then the smaller those grants would be. I think for me, the challenge is that I don't think that government is necessarily the vessel to achieve every goal. And I believe more in people than I believe in government as a problem-solving force.
Yeah. So that, to me, that's an old school liberal. Which strikes me as different from progressive in that they're always trying to find governmental answers to things.
So what I think is that government is very bad at many, many things. And it's good at some things. And so we need to lean into the things it's good at.
Yeah. So what are the things it's good at?
Well, one thing it's really excellent at is sending large numbers of checks to large numbers of people promptly and reliably every month. That's like a core competence. So we just lean into that.
Right. You may not want, see, that's where my libertarian bell goes off, and it's like, oh, the best thing the government could do is give people stuff. And it's like, even if they're good at getting the check delivered, like, we got a bigger problem, you know what I mean?
Well, part of it, and here's the argument I'd make, is that it's our stuff. You know what I mean? It's like our wealth. We're the owners, we're the shareholders. It's not that the government's like giving me stuff that's not mine. Mm-hmm. You know, like I'm an owner of the richest, most advanced country in the history of the world. We're up to 20 trillion in GDP, and we can easily afford a $1,000 dividend. And if a company does that, it's just good management. Like, no one gets mad at Verizon when they're like, hey, we're taking the dividend up. It's like, what are you giving these shareholders, like, money?
Right.
It's like it's just considered good corporate management, and it's good management of a society.
So I know you've explained a little bit of how you pay for some of this stuff, but how does this affect taxes in general? at the federal level?
I mean, to me, we have to go where the money is, and the money is in the economic activities of companies like Amazon, particularly as technology just keeps on getting more and more efficient and powerful. Do I think that our current tax rate should be more progressive? Like I do, but I also try and convince people, it's like, look, Jeff Bezos post-divorce is worth like $120 billion or whatnot. You can take his income tax rate to whatever you want, and he's not going to end up paying any significant proportion of that 120 billion because most of it is in Amazon stock. He's too smart to have a taxable event. So like income tax is not the way you actually balance things out.
So that also puts you really at odds with a lot of the mainstream Democrats, right? Because they seem to want to put the progressive tax to make sure that these billionaires don't exist. Or like if you look at AOC's Green Deal, it was like, we're going to tax the hell out of the billionaires. But then at the same time, she's always telling you how evil billionaires are. So there's an odd thing. It's like, we need the billionaires to pay for this thing, even though we know we can't actually pay for it. But then also they're evil, and we have to get rid of them.
Well, so one, I definitely don't think that billionaires are intrinsically evil. I mean, they're the natural byproducts of this economic system that we've had in place for years and years. And two, like, again, I'm for a more progressive set of tax rates because we're anomalously low relative to our own history and other developed countries. But I don't see that as the actual way to get the resources we need to do some of these things.
What about a flat tax? Why not just flat tax the whole thing? It's 15% for everybody, lowest 50 grand and under, you get nothing. No taxes, you're good to go. And then everyone else just pays the same. And we go from there.
Well, one thing I will say is that if you were to, and one reason I love the value-added tax so much and that every other country has it, you don't want to tax things that you're trying to encourage. And I want to encourage jobs and labor in every situation. So over time, I would love it if we get off of the taxation of labor income.
So payroll tax.
Yeah, like that stuff actually is the opposite of what you want. Because you want people to work more and you want more people to hire folks. So one of the reasons why
I feel you as a small businessman, I feel it, right? Like I'm paying the payroll tax. I would love to be hiring more people right now.
Yes, and the biggest burden on you is healthcare. You know, it's like I've been an employer, and guess what? Like if you like put me in a position where my incentives are to make everyone a temp, and that if I hire someone full time, then it's going to take my cost of hiring that person up 20%. Then I'm going to hire fewer people.
Can I just pat myself on the back in front of a presidential candidate for a second?
Sure.
I pay 100% of my employees' health and dental because
Oh,
I just view it as I want people to feel good about working here because I know if they're happy and healthy and the rest of it, like to me it's self-preservation. It's like if they're happy and healthy, they want to work here, feel rewarded, they're going to do better work. Let's actually dive into some of the culture wars though, because the one, especially for me, and that we're doing this on YouTube, that's incredibly important, is the censorship stuff and big tech, and have these companies grown too large. I'm becoming a broken record here, but as a small government guy, I don't really want the government involved yet with the amount of information that Google controls and owns over us and all of these things and the way they control all the avenues of communication. It's pushing my libertarian beliefs to sort of the end of the road here. Do you view this as a big issue? Is this something you care about? Do you want government involvement, et cetera?
It's a very big issue. I care deeply about it. And then the question we have to figure out is who do we want making these kinds of decisions? I would suggest that we probably want to have some say ourselves in these decisions, which would suggest that the government be an active decision maker as opposed to just letting big tech platforms make decisions as our proxies. And at this point, even some of the big tech companies are throwing their hands up and saying, we should not be making these decisions.
Do you think they want regulation at this point? But because not only because it's an impossible set of decisions, but also in a weird way that would ultimately hold their monopoly on all of this stuff once the government was involved?
I think that they expect that regulation is inevitable, and they're trying to make it like the most benign version for their interests that it can be.
So what would your strong preference be then? Like, is the government, like, are we talking about breaking up these companies? Do you, like, I always say this, but it's like I'm in California. I pay my state taxes on a California state website. It looks like Prodigy in 1993. Like the idea that the government is going to come in and understand the epic problems. You know, a government regulator is going to come in and understand the algorithm and the rest of what's going on at YouTube sounds so bananas to me. It's like I could only see this creating other problems down the road.
So you definitely don't want government controlling it and executing on it. I think you do want government to be able to provide very, very clear rules and guidelines so that everyone knows what really where we all stand. And in terms of where I would stand, I think that we have become overly sensitive to the fact that if someone has an idea that is something I disagree with, that it's somehow going to be harmful to me to either be exposed to that or to have some sort of contact with that person or organization. So one, I think the government does need to get involved. I think the tech companies at this point are expecting it. And two, if you were to create guidelines, I would want them to be as mindful of the fact that that we live in a country where free speech is protected and that people need to be able to express different types of viewpoints without feeling like they're going to get cast out of the public forum.
So you would basically sort of treat them like a public utility? That basically everyone should have access to them, and as long as you're not breaking the laws of the United States. Something like that. That's pretty much where I'm at. If I had to go the government route, it's like, if you're not breaking the laws of the United States, I believe everyone should have access to these things. And then if you're selling drugs on them or involved in terrorism or something else. But beyond that, it's like, if you're Steven Crowder and you make a joke, or you're me and you talk to somebody who's shady or whatever, you know what I mean, as an interviewer or whatever, it's like you have a right to do all of those things. But if you're breaking the direct laws of the United States, then there's something else.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. But this is one of the struggles. This guy, Jaron Lanier, have you spoken to him? He's one of the internet pioneers.
No.
He said something that really stuck with me. He said that the internet is much better at transmitting negative sentiments and ideas than positive sentiments and ideas.
Have you been on Twitter?
and that has very profound repercussions. And so that's one of the reasons why people are struggling so much with this, is that they feel like, in principle, you and I are on the same page. It's like, look, as long as you're not breaking the law, like, people should be able to say what they want. But then some of these negative ideas and sentiments and emotions are so viral in such a propulsive way that then, like, in many ways, then, like, the natural reaction is say, oh, I guess we have to clamp down on that. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, clamp down on this, that, and then it ends up being a line drawing problem and a slippery slope.
Yeah. So basically, but you're saying you have to suck it up, though, right? Because that's the risk you have to take. You're going to hear some bad stuff.
Yeah, I think there's like a saying, it's like, it's something like, train the child, not the road. Mm-hmm. Is that, like, we need to make ourselves more resilient, such that if I see an idea that I find antagonistic or offensive, that I don't think that's necessarily something that's criminal.
Yeah. If we would have thought about these issues differently, or if the right set of people would have thought about the technological issues and the speed with which everything's changing, if we would have thought about this differently in a public way, say 10 or 15 years ago, we might have put up some barriers to some of this stuff. I don't believe that those barriers can actually be, because I am a believer that once the cat's out of the bag, once progress exists, once technology exists, you can't stop it. I don't think there's any evidence in human history that you can. But do you think that if we would have, and maybe some people were, really thinking these through 10 years ago, that it would have not led us here, or that maybe the boundaries of the sort of craziness might have been a little different?
There are things we could have done, for sure. And it starts with a belief in our people, where the countermeasure for the lost manufacturing jobs was shitty retraining programs that didn't work. The better countermeasure would have been like, hey, certain companies and certain parts of our society are going to benefit to the tune of billions of dollars from this globalization. You're going to lose your job. Most of it was automation, it wasn't globalization, so it's 80% automation. You're going to lose your job. We're going to start spreading the bounty to you as quickly as possible and give you a path forward. Same thing with trucking, $168 billion in potential cost savings per year by automating truck driving jobs. Mm-hmm. How much of that right now are the truckers going to receive? Probably zero.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Elon's basically going to put these Tesla trucks out there. I don't blame him for it. It's freaking amazing technology. A lot of people are going to go out of work because of it.
Yes.
And the guys that are losing their job, they're going to get on the government dole then, because they'll get unemployment.
Perhaps, right? And,
Wait, why only perhaps?
well, it's true that they could file for unemployment, but right now unemployment benefits aren't permanent.
But at least in the short stopgap, you then have more government expense, and then
they file for disability,
right?
Because about half of the manufacturing workers that lost their jobs ended up on disability in various states, and the two major conditions that they filed for were mood disorders and musculoskeletal problems, which is generally a bad back. How many truck drivers do you think have a bad back? All of them.
Pretty much everybody. Pretty much everybody, or they will. If they don't right now, they will. They don't know. Year.
Yeah. So 80% of truckers have a marker for like a chronic health problem. So obesity, disease, high blood pressure, like diabetes, high blood pressure, like some condition. So they'll wind up on the government expense line in a very dark, punitive, dehumanizing way that's going to be debilitating. And so what we have to do is we have to start owning, saying, okay, if this transitions on, then we should be taking at least some proportion of this $168 billion and trying to create like a more active runway. We should have done that with the automation of manufacturing jobs too. That's why, again, Donald Trump is our president today, is that no one was actually speaking to that.
All right, so let's just knock out. You got a little more time for me?
Sure. Oh wait,
right.
no. So
yeah.
I didn't even so education is pay teachers more, but here's the thing about education I want to hit, is that so many of the Dems are talking about free college, free college, free college. College is way too expensive. We need to bring the cost down. But only 33% of Americans will attend college. 67% will either not go to college or they'll attend like a 2-year associates or community college. So what we have to do is we have to dramatically invest in vocational technical training and apprenticeship programs. Right now, only 6% of American high school students are in technical training. In Germany, that's 59%. So think of that gulf. And then we have to destigmatize trade jobs. We have to get Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs and me as president in the White House being like, these are great jobs. And then we have to get all these high school kids to say like, look, college is not for everyone. Right now, we're trumpeting this fantasy that college is the end-all, be-all. College has gone up in price 250%, which is its own set of problems. But the 6-year graduation rate from a 4-year college right now is only 59%. 4 out of 10 kids who are starting college are not finishing within 6 years because they probably should not have been there.
Are you ready to have that blowout fight with Bernie on the debate stage? Because when he says college for everybody, free college for everybody, and again, it sounds good, and I get why he's saying it, and then you say, well, actually, college isn't for everybody, and we need more trade jobs and things like that. People are going to say, oh, somehow, they're going to say you're the elitist, like, you think only a certain, well, but that's what they're going to say is, oh, you think only a certain set of people from a certain way of life deserve to go to college, and other people are just going to have to suck it up with their crappy trade jobs. I think that's actually a more honest answer, but just the way the media frame things. I mean, that's something to me that will really come to loggerheads if the debates ever get good and get really about substance.
You may see that exchange on June 26th on the debate stage, because it could be just me next to Bernie. I'll give you a birthday present and just like in front
I
of
want a shout out on that
this
one.
free college stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, and again, it's like the minimum wage. It's like, am I for bringing down the cost of college? Yes. Am I for pretending that's going to be like the cure-all for like our current economic ills? No, because it's not. And again, the unemployment rate for recent college grads is 44%. That does not change if I make it free. It's like, is it better for them to be underemployed and not have giant debt loads? Yes, but like, is that going to be necessarily the path forward for everyone? No.
Right, and plus the amount of money we would have had to put in to do that for them to then not have the path to the job.
Yes, so what we have to do is we have to go to the colleges and say, why the heck did you get so expensive? And the reason they're so expensive is that the ratio of administrators to students, non-faculty, non-teaching administrators has gone up 150%. Over the last number of years. So we have to try and get the administrator to student ratio under control.